The shuttle doors opened, and Morgan stepped onto the deck of Prime for the first time. The orbital station stretched out before her like a small city floating in space. Thousands of beings from dozens of worlds walked through the corridors, and every single one of them stopped to stare at her. She was used to it by now. Humans had only made contact with the Galactic Coalition 3 years ago, and most aliens had never seen one in person. They knew humans only from reports and warnings. They called her kind, creatures from a planet so dangerous that simply surviving childhood was considered an achievement. Walked through the station with her bag over her shoulder. She was 22 years old, with brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of calm confidence that came from growing up on a ranch in Montana and serving 2 years in the United States Marine Corps. She had been selected for the Coalition Exchange Program because her commanders said she was tough, adaptable, and did not know how to quit. She intended to prove them right. The military academy occupied the eastern section of the station, followed the directions on her tablet until she reached a massive set of doors marked with symbols in a dozen languages. She recognized the English translation at the bottom: Elite Training Division, authorized personnel only. She pressed her hand to the scanner, and the doors slid open. Inside, a large training hall held about 30 recruits from at least 12 different species. Some were tall and thin with pale skin in shades of blue and green. Others were massive and covered in scales or fur. A few were so strange that could not even guess what kind of worlds they came from. They all wore the same gray training uniforms, and they all turned to look at her when she entered. Found an empty spot in the formation and stood at attention. She kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. She could feel the others watching her, studying her, trying to decide if the rumors about humans were true. A door at the far end of the hall opened, and their instructor entered. He was a tall and impossibly thin with pale blue skin and 4 arms. His eyes were solid black, and his face showed no emotion at all. He wore the dark uniform of a senior training officer, and medals covered his chest like armor. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had never been challenged in his life. His name was, and he had been training recruits for 40 years. Every species in the coalition knew his reputation. He did not produce soldiers, he produced weapons, and he did it by breaking them down until nothing remained but obedience. Stopped at the front of the formation and let the silence stretch out. His black eyes moved across the recruits, measuring each one, finding their weaknesses. When his gaze reached, it lingered for a long moment before moving on. "You are nothing," he said. His voice was cold and flat. "You come from your little worlds thinking you are special, thinking you are strong. You are wrong. You are soft and weak and afraid, and you will remain that way until I remake you into something useful." He began to pace along the front of the formation. "This academy has one purpose: to take the pathetic creatures that your governments send me and turn them into soldiers worthy of the coalition. Most of you will fail. Some of you will break. A few of you will quit and go home in shame. I do not care. The ones who survive my training will be ready for anything the galaxy can throw at them." He stopped in front of a small recruit with large dark eyes and grayish skin. A guest from the reports she had studied. They were known for being gentle and intelligent, but physically fragile. "You said, what is your name?" This voice was barely a whisper. "Instructor." "Speak up, I cannot hear weakness." "Instructor," she said louder, her voice shaking. Reached into his belt and pulled out a small device. It looked like a simple metal cylinder, but had read about these too. A neural compliance device. It connected to the pain centers of most species' brains and could deliver agony at the push of a button. "You spoke without proper protocol," said. "You did not wait to be addressed. This is your first lesson in discipline." He pressed the button, screamed and dropped to her knees. Her whole body shook as the device sent waves of pain through her nervous system. The other recruits watched in horror, but none of them moved. None of them dared. hands tightened into fists at her sides. She kept her face blank, but inside a cold anger was building. She had seen drill instructors push recruits hard. She had been pushed hard herself. But this was not training. This was cruelty for its own sake. Released the button and collapsed forward, gasping for breath. Tears ran down her gray cheeks. "Let that be a lesson to all of you," said. "In this academy, discipline is not a request. It is not a suggestion. It is absolute. You will obey or you will suffer. There is no third option." He turned and his eyes found again. He walked toward her slowly, studying her the way a predator studies prey. "The human," he said. "I have heard stories about your kind, survivors of a planet that tries to kill everything on it. Some of my colleagues think this makes you dangerous." He leaned closer, his black eyes inches from her face. "I think it makes you arrogant. You believe your world has prepared you for anything. You are wrong. Your world has prepared you for nothing. You will learn your place here just like everyone else." Met his gaze without flinching. She said nothing. She did not need to. Held the stare for a long moment, then stepped back. "Tomorrow begins physical conditioning. I have designed a special program for this class. We will see if the is everything the reports claim." A cold smile crossed his thin lips. "I suspect you will find that Earth's gravity means nothing in my academy." He turned and walked away, leaving the recruits standing in shocked silence. Looked across the formation at who was still on her knees, still trembling. Their eyes met for just a moment, gave her the smallest nod, a promise, a message. "Hold on, this is not over." The other recruits slowly filed out of the hall, speaking in hushed whispers about what they had witnessed. Waited until most of them had gone, then walked over to and offered her hand. The looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. "You should not help me. He will punish you too." Smiled, "Let him try." She pulled to her feet, and together they walked out of the training hall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new pain. Could feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. But storms did not scare her. She had grown up in them, and she had learned long ago that the only way through was forward. The training grounds were massive. Had seen plenty of military facilities back on Earth, but nothing like this. The indoor complex stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, with adjustable gravity plates built into the floors and environmental controls that could simulate almost any condition in the galaxy. Stood at the center of the grounds with his 4 arms clasped behind his back. The 30 recruits lined up before him in perfect formation. No one wanted to be the next example of his discipline. "Today we begin with endurance," announced. "A simple 5-mile run. The gravity has been set to 1.2 standard, which is 20% higher than most of your." His black eyes swept across the formation and stopped on, with the exception of the human, of course. Her world is already at 1 standard. This should feel almost normal for her. Said nothing. She knew what he was doing. He was setting expectations, making sure everyone knew that if she failed, it would be even more shameful because the conditions were supposedly easier for her. "Begin," said. The recruits started running. Within the first mile, could see the differences between species. The recruits, massive and scaled, had power but tired quickly. The thin and graceful could maintain pace but struggled with the increased gravity pulling at their light frames. The including fell to the back almost immediately, their small bodies not built for this kind of physical stress. Ran at an easy pace. The gravity felt familiar, maybe even a little light compared to home. She had run 5 miles before breakfast every day during her time in the Marines. This was nothing. She finished first. She was not even breathing hard. His expression did not change, but could see something tighten in his jaw. He had expected her to struggle. He had expected to find weakness. Instead, he found a human woman standing calmly while the rest of the class staggered across the finish line over the next 20 minutes. "Acceptable," he said, and the word sounded like it hurt him. "Now we move to obstacle courses." The obstacles were brutal. Walls to climb, pits to jump, beams to balance on, tunnels to crawl through. Had designed them to test every physical capability, and he adjusted the difficulty for each species to push them to their limits. For he set the course to maximum difficulty. The walls were higher, the pits were wider, the tunnels were and filled with simulated toxic gas that burned her eyes and throat. She completed it faster than anyone else in the class. His jaw tightened further. He ordered combat drills, took down every opponent he sent against her, including a named who stood nearly 8 feet tall and weighed over 400 pounds. She used his size against him, slipping under his guard and putting him on the ground in less than 10 seconds. By the end of the session, the other recruits were staring at her with something between fear and amazement. The whispers had started. The human is not normal. The human is something else. The human might actually be everything the reports said. Walked toward with slow, deliberate steps. His face was calm, but his black eyes burned with something cold and dangerous. "You have performed adequately," he said, "but physical ability means nothing without discipline, and I do not believe you understand discipline yet." He pulled out the neural compliance device. "You were 30 seconds late returning to formation after the combat drills. This is unacceptable. You will receive correction." Knew she had not been late. She had been helping stand up after being knocked down during her own drill, had seen it. He was punishing her for showing kindness. She stood at attention and said nothing. "Set the device to level 3. This setting would incapacitate most species. Let us see what it does to us." He pressed the button. Pain exploded through his body. It felt like every nerve was on fire at once. Her muscles seized and her vision went white at the edges. She could hear gasps from the other recruits, could feel them waiting for her to fall. She did not fall. The pain was bad. She would not lie about that. It was worse than anything she had felt in training back home. But pain was something she understood. Pain was her old friend from broken bones on the ranch and brutal conditioning in boot camp. Pain was information, her drill instructor had always said. It tells you something is wrong, but it does not get to make your decisions. Gritted her teeth and forced her body to stay upright. And then she did something that made the entire training hall go silent. She laughed. It was not a hysterical laugh or a pained laugh. It was a genuine, almost amused sound, like someone had told her a mildly funny joke. "My drill instructor back home hit harder than that," she said. His eyes went wide. For the first time since had arrived, she saw real emotion on his face. Shock, confusion, and underneath it all, the first flicker of something that might have been fear. "Level 5, he said, and his voice was not quite steady. The pain doubled, then doubled again. His knees buckled and she dropped down to one knee. Sweat ran down her face and her hands shook against the floor. The world was nothing but agony, every cell in her body screaming at her to give up, to surrender, to make it stop. She forced herself back to her feet. She was still smiling. "Is that all you have?" she asked. Stared at her for a long moment. The silence in the training hall was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. They were watching something they had never seen before, something that should not have been possible. A human standing up to the worst the Academy could offer. A human refusing to break. Released the device and turned away. "Training is concluded for today," he said, and his voice was flat and empty. He walked out of the hall without looking back. The recruits slowly began to move again, but they kept their distance from, all except one. Approached her with careful steps, her large eyes even wider than usual. "How did you do that?" she asked quietly. "How did you survive that pain?" Took a deep breath and let the last tremors fade from her muscles. The pain was already fading, replaced by the dull ache of overtaxed nerves. "Humans experience pain differently than most species," she said. "Our ancestors survived on a world that tried to kill them every day. We evolved to keep going even when everything hurts." Shook her head in disbelief. "But you laughed. No one laughs at the compliance device. No one. Smiled, and this time it was softer, more human. On Earth, we have a saying, "What does not kill you makes you stronger." I have been hurt before. I have been scared before. But I learned a long time ago that pain is just information. It tells you something is wrong, but it does not get to give you orders. She put her hand on shoulder. You can learn this too. All of you can. Pain does not have to control you. Fear does not have to win. Stared at her for a long moment, and something changed in her eyes. A small spark of hope where before there had been only fear. "Will you teach me?" she asked. Nodded. "I will teach anyone who wants to learn." She looked around the training hall at the other recruits, all of them watching, all of them listening. She saw fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else. Curiosity, interest, the first small seeds of courage. Had wanted to break her today. Instead, he had shown everyone exactly what a human could do. And knew with quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed changed everything at the academy. Became obsessed with breaking. He assigned her extra duties that would have crushed anyone else. Double training sessions, night watches, cleaning the entire equipment bay with manual tools while the others slept. He found reasons to punish her every single day, using the compliance device so often that some recruits started keeping count. Completed every task, she endured every punishment, and she never stopped smiling. But what drove truly mad was not her endurance. It was what she did with the time between punishments. Started teaching. It began with, every night after the official training ended, would find a quiet corner of the barracks and show the breathing exercises she had learned back on Earth. Simple techniques that helped manage pain and control fear. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out for 4 counts. Focus on the breath, not the pain. Let the fear pass through you instead of taking root. Within a week, could take a level 2 hit from the compliance device without falling. Within 2 weeks, she could take level 3. The other recruits noticed. They started coming to one by one, asking for help. They wanted to learn how to build endurance despite their light frames. A species with poor vision asked to teach them the awareness techniques that Marines used to track movement without relying on sight. Even the massive who had put on the ground during combat drills approached her one night with his head bowed in respect. "Teach me," he said. "Teach me to fight like you do, not just with strength but with thought." Taught them all. She shared everything she knew about human training methods, about psychology, about the mental frameworks that let soldiers keep going when their bodies wanted to quit. She was not just teaching them skills. She was teaching them how to believe in themselves. The change in the barracks was slow but undeniable. Recruits who had barely spoken to each other began working together. Species that had been rivals for centuries shared meals and training tips. The fear that had cultivated so carefully was being replaced by something else. Solidarity, trust, the beginning of real teamwork. Saw it happening, and it made him furious. He reported to Commander, the Academy's head administrator. She was old and wise, with silver-gray skin and eyes that seemed to see everything. She had run the Academy for over 60 years and had seen thousands of recruits pass through its halls. "The human is disrupting my training program," said. "She is undermining my authority and filling the recruits' heads with dangerous ideas. She needs to be removed." Listened calmly. "What dangerous ideas?" "She tells them that they do not need to fear. She tells them that pain can be controlled. She tells them that helping each other makes them stronger." His voice was filled with contempt. "These are lies. Fear and pain are the tools that forge real soldiers. Compassion is weakness." "I see," he said. "I would like to observe this human myself." The next day came to the training grounds. She stood at the edge of the facility, watching silently as ran the recruits through their exercises. Noticed her immediately but did not let it distract her from the training. The final exercise of the day was an obstacle course designed for teams of 3. Each team had to complete the course together, and no one could cross the finish line until all 3 members made it. Was paired with and a recruit named. Was one of the weakest in the class physically, with thin limbs and eyes that could barely see in the bright lights of the training facility. Most teams would have seen him as a burden, saw him as a challenge to solve. She positioned between herself and guiding him with verbal commands through the parts of the course he could not see. When they reached a wall too high for him to climb alone, she boosted him up while pulled from above. When they crossed a balance beam over a pit, went first and talked through every step, her voice calm and steady. They finished the course in 4th place. It was not the fastest time, but it was faster than anyone expected. And more importantly, they finished together. Watched the whole thing with great interest. After the session, confronted in front of the entire class, his 4 hands were clenched into fists, and his black eyes blazed with barely controlled anger. "You wasted time helping the weak," he said. "A real soldier would have left them behind and finished first. Your compassion cost your team victory." Stood at attention, her face calm. "With respect, Instructor, I disagree." "You disagree?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You dare to disagree with me?" "Yes, Instructor. Where I come from, real soldiers never leave anyone behind. That is not weakness. That is what makes us strong." Stepped closer, looming over her. "Your planet's primitive ideas have no place in this academy. Strength comes from dominance, from control, from the willingness to sacrifice the weak for the good of the mission." "No," said quietly. "Strength comes from trust, from knowing that the person next to you will never abandon you, no matter how hard things get. That is what makes a team. That is what makes a unit willing to die for each other." She met his gaze without flinching. "That is what you will never understand." The silence stretched out like a wire pulled tight. Every recruit held their breath, even leaned forward slightly, watching the confrontation with sharp attention. His face twisted with rage, but he did not strike her. Instead, he took a step back and composed himself with visible effort. "Very well," he said. "You believe your way is better. Let us put that to the test." A cold smile spread across his thin lips. "Next week, this class will undergo a special evaluation, a survival scenario on the moon of 4, 3 days in one of the most hostile environments in Coalition space." He looked around at the other recruits, making sure they were all listening. "I have designed this scenario myself. It will test everything you think you know about strength and survival. By the end, you will understand the truth." His eyes returned to, "Kindness is weakness, compassion is death, and your human ideas will get you all killed." He turned and walked away, leaving the recruits standing in worried silence. Felt a hand on her arm. It was, her large eyes filled with concern. "He designed it to make you fail," whispered. "He will make it impossible." Nodded slowly, "Probably." "Then what do we do?" Looked around at the other recruits, all of them watching her, waiting for her answer. She saw fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else. Trust, belief. The seeds she had planted over the past weeks were starting to grow. "We do what we have always done," she said. "We face it together, we help each other, and we prove him wrong." From across the training grounds, Commander watched the young human rally her fellow recruits. A small smile crossed her aged face. She had studied humans since first contact. She had read the reports about their history, their wars, their incredible ability to survive against impossible odds. But reports were just words on a screen. They could not capture what she was seeing now. Humans were not just survivors. They were leaders. They were connectors. They took broken, frightened individuals and turned them into families. Made a decision. She would let have his evaluation, but she would be watching very carefully, because she suspected that the lesson about to be learned would not be the one intended. The dropship descended through 4's thin atmosphere and got her first look at the frozen moon below. It was a nightmare landscape of ice and rock, with temperatures that dropped to 50 below zero at night and winds that could knock a grown human off their feet. The sky was a permanent gray, thick with clouds that blocked most of the distant sun's light. The recruits sat in silence as the ship landed. They wore standard survival suits that would protect them from the worst of the cold, but the suits were basic: minimal heating, limited air filtration, just enough to keep them alive if they were smart and lucky. His voice came through the speakers. "Your objective is simple. Reach the extraction point 50 miles north of this location within 3 days. You have been provided with basic supplies and emergency beacons. Use the beacons only if you are dying. Anyone who activates a beacon fails the evaluation automatically." The cargo door opened, and freezing wind rushed into the ship, stood up and looked at her fellow recruits. 30 beings from 12 different worlds, most of them evolved on planets far warmer and gentler than this frozen hell. "Remember what we trained for," she said. "Stay together, help each other. We all make it or none of us do." They stepped out onto the ice. The first day was brutal. The terrain was uneven and treacherous, with hidden crevasses and unstable ice sheets that could give way without warning. Took Point, using her experience with harsh environments to find the safest path, walked at the back, his massive body helping to break the wind for the smaller species behind him. By nightfall, they had covered 12 miles. It was not enough, but it was something. Organized the group into a tight formation, using their bodies to share warmth while they rested. She taught them the same techniques that human explorers had used for centuries on Earth's frozen poles. Stay close, keep moving, never let the cold settle into your bones. 2 recruits developed hypothermia despite their suits. Their species was from a tropical world, and their bodies simply could not handle the cold. Wrapped them in emergency blankets and positioned the warmest bodies around them. She stayed awake through the night, monitoring their breathing, keeping them alive through sheer stubborn refusal to let them die. The second day brought new dangers. They were crossing a frozen valley when spotted movement on the ridge above them. Local predators, drawn by the heat signatures of 30 warm bodies crossing their territory. The creatures were large and fast, with white fur that blended perfectly into the snow and teeth designed for tearing through ice and flesh alike. "Everyone stay calm," said quietly. "Do not run, that triggers their hunting instinct." But one of the recruits panicked. He bolted and the predators gave chase. Did not hesitate. She ran after them, putting herself between the creatures and the fleeing recruit. She grabbed a survival tool from her belt and stood her ground as 3 of the beasts charged toward her. The fight was fast and vicious. Used every combat technique she knew, striking at eyes and joints, keeping the creatures focused on her instead of the others. She took hits. Claws raked across her arm and teeth grazed her shoulder, but she did not go down. Behind her and the other combat-capable recruits formed a defensive line. They made noise and threw equipment, driving the rest of the pack back. The predators decided this prey was not worth the effort and retreated into the snow. Stood panting in the cold air, blood dripping from her wounds onto the ice. Rushed to her side with a medical kit. "You could have died," said as she worked on the cuts. "But I did not," replied, "and neither did anyone else." They kept moving. By the end of the second day, they had covered 30 miles. Only 20 more to go, but they were running out of time and energy. The cold was sapping their strength faster than expected, and the supplies were running low. On the third morning, disaster struck. They were crossing an ice bridge when it collapsed beneath them. Most of the recruits made it across, but fell. She caught herself on a ledge 20 feet down, her leg twisted at a painful angle. Was at the edge of the crevasse instantly. "Hold on, I am coming down." She lowered herself carefully, using cracks in the ice as handholds. When she reached, she could see the damage. Broken leg, no way to walk on it. His voice crackled through their communication devices. "Recruit is injured. The extraction point is still 15 miles away. You have 8 hours remaining." There was a pause and could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Leave her behind if you want to make it in time. This is the reality of survival. The weak are left behind so the strong can continue." Looked down at, the eyes were filled with pain and fear but also acceptance. "He is right," whispered. "You cannot carry me 15 miles. You will all fail because of me." "No," said. She lifted onto her back, adjusting the smaller alien's weight so she could still move. Then she started climbing out of the crevasse. It took everything she had. Her muscles screamed and her injuries from the predator attack burned with every movement. But she kept going, one handhold at a time, one step at a time. When she reached the top, the other recruits were waiting, stepped forward immediately. "Let me take her, you need to rest." Shook her head. "We take turns, everyone who can carries her for a stretch. We spread the burden." They started moving again. Carried for the first 2 miles, then past her 2, then to a recruit named, then back 2. They moved in a rotating chain of support, each person giving what they could so that others could rest. Watched through orbital sensors, and his frustration grew with every mile they covered. This was not how it was supposed to go. The human was supposed to make the hard choice. She was supposed to prove that compassion was weakness by failing to save everyone. Instead, she was proving exactly the opposite. They reached the extraction point with 2 hours to spare. 30 recruits, all of them alive, all of them accounted for. It was the first time in the history of this evaluation that a full class had completed it together. Sat down gently on the landing pad and allowed herself a moment to breathe. Every part of her body ached. She had pushed herself beyond any limit she had known before. But when she looked around at the faces of her fellow recruits, she saw something that made it all worth it. Pride, belonging, love. They were not just recruits anymore. They were family. Was waiting when the rescue shuttle landed. His face was unreadable, but his black eyes burned with something dark and cold. "You passed the test," he said, "but the real evaluation begins now." He pressed a button on his wrist device. Heard a mechanical whine from the shuttle behind them. The engines were powering down. The doors were locking. "What are you doing?" she demanded. His thin lips curled into a cruel smile. "Teaching you the final lesson." The wind howled across the landing pad as the recruits realized what had happened. The shuttle was locked. Their only way off this frozen moon had just been taken from them. Stepped forward, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. "This is the true test," he said. "Everything before was just preparation. Now we see what you really are." Moved to stand between and the other recruits. "What do you want?" "I want you to choose." His black eyes glittered with cold satisfaction. "The shuttle has limited life support. It can only sustain 5 passengers for the return trip. Choose 5 recruits to save and leave the rest behind to die on this moon." He spread his 4 hands wide. "This is reality. This is what leaders must do. The strong survive. The weak perish. Make the choice." The recruits behind began to whisper in fear. Some of them started to cry. They had come so far, survived so much, only to face this impossible decision at the end. Looked at for a long moment, then she shook her head slowly. "No." Blinked no. "I will not choose. I will not sacrifice anyone. Either we all leave this moon together or none of us do." "Then you will all die," said. "And you will have proven exactly what I always knew. Compassion is stupidity. Your human weakness has killed everyone who trusted you." Took a step toward him, then another. Stood his ground, confident in his authority, certain that she would not dare to challenge him directly. He was wrong. Moved faster than his eyes could track. In one smooth motion, she closed the distance between them, knocked his hand away from his wrist device, and swept his legs out from under him. Before he could react, she had him pinned face down on the ice with his arms twisted behind his back. "You have missed the point entirely," she said quietly. Her voice was calm but filled with a cold certainty. "You think humans are strong because we come from a dangerous world. That is only part of it." She leaned closer, her breath visible in the frozen air. "We are strong because we learned that survival means protecting each other. On our world, the lone hunter dies. The one who abandons his tribe dies. The selfish one who hoards resources dies. We survived because we took care of each other, because we fought for each other, because we would rather die together than live alone." Struggled against her grip but could not break free. Despite his 4 arms, despite his decades of combat training, he was helpless against the human who had grown up wrestling cattle and training with the most elite soldiers on Earth. "Let me go," he hissed. "I am your instructor, I am your superior. You will face consequences for this." "No," said, "you will face consequences." A new voice echoed across the landing pad. "She is correct." Looked up to see Commander descending from a second shuttle that had appeared while she was focused on. The old walked across the ice with calm dignity, her silver robes flowing behind her. "I have been watching everything," said. "Every moment of this evaluation, every choice you made." She stopped in front of and looked down at him with disappointment in her ancient eyes. "This was not your test, Instructor, it was mine. A test to see if you had learned anything in your 40 years at this academy. You have failed." His face contorted with rage and confusion. "Failed? I was teaching them the truth. I was showing them what real strength means." "No." His voice was sharp as a blade. "You were showing them cruelty and calling it wisdom. You were teaching fear and calling it discipline. And you nearly killed 30 promising recruits because your pride could not accept that a human understood something you never learned." She gestured to the security officers who had emerged from her shuttle. They pulled to his feet and restrained him. "You are hereby relieved of all duties," said. "You will face a full tribunal for endangering coalition recruits and violating every ethical code this academy stands for." As the officers led him away, turned to look at one last time, there was no anger left in his eyes, only emptiness, only the hollow look of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. Felt no satisfaction watching him go, only a quiet sadness. He had spent his whole life believing that cruelty was strength. He had never learned the truth that humans figured out in their caves and villages thousands of years ago. That real strength comes from connection, from love, from the willingness to sacrifice for others instead of sacrificing others for yourself. Approached and the other recruits. "You have all performed beyond any expectation. In the entire history of this academy, no class has ever completed the evaluation without losses. You did it by supporting each other, by refusing to leave anyone behind, by treating compassion as strength instead of weakness." She turned to specifically. "And you, Morgan, have shown us something that the Coalition needed to see. Humans are not just survivors. You are leaders. You are builders. You take broken pieces and make them whole." Shook her head. "I did not do this alone. We did it together. That is the whole point." Smiled. "And that is exactly why I am offering you a position. Not as a recruit, but as an assistant instructor. This academy needs someone who understands what you understand. Someone who can teach the next generation what real strength means." Looked at the other recruits, was smiling through her pain, was nodding with respect. Even the ones she had never spoken to directly were watching her with something like hope in their eyes. "I will do it," said, "but only if my friends get to stay together. This unit works. Do not break it apart." "Agreed," said. 6 months later, stood at the front of the training hall, watching a new class of recruits file in. They were nervous and scared, just like her class had been on that first day. They looked at her with uncertainty, trying to figure out what kind of instructor she would be. Smiled at them. "Welcome to the Elite Training Division," she said. "I am Instructor Morgan. This academy is going to challenge you in ways you cannot imagine. It is going to push you to your limits and beyond. but I want you to understand something from the very beginning." She looked at each of them in turn, making sure they felt seen. "You are not alone here. This is not a competition. We succeed together or we learn together. No one gets left behind. No one fails alone. That is not weakness. That is the source of all real strength." A recruit raised her hand nervously. "Instructor, what happens if we cannot keep up? What if we fail?" Smile widened. "Then we figure out why and we help you get better. There is no shame in struggling. There is only shame in giving up on each other." From the observation deck above the training hall, Commander watched the new class begin their first session. Beside her, working a minor administrative desk, sat. His rank had been stripped. His authority was gone. He spent his days filing reports and processing paperwork. He never smiled anymore. He never laughed. But sometimes when he watched teach, something flickered in his black eyes. Something that might have been regret. Something that might have been understanding, coming far too late. He had spent 40 years teaching recruits that compassion was weakness. That fear was the only path to strength. That breaking others was the way to build soldiers. A human woman from a death world had proven him wrong in less than 3 months. And now, watching her turn frightened recruits into confident teams, watching her build the kind of bonds that his methods had always destroyed, he was finally beginning to understand why. Humans were not strong despite their compassion. They were strong because of it. And alone in his small administrative corner, would spend the rest of his career watching that truth play out again and again. He never laughed at the girl's methods. He never laughed at anything, ever again. But perhaps in his own small way, he finally understood why she had laughed at his.